Hi, and welcome back to Father IELTS. Recall from the video about part 2 of the speaking test that candidates that share a common native language often commit similar mistakes in their oral responses. In this video, we will be examining some errors that are common to all candidates and to Chinese candidates specifically. In order for you to avoid these pitfalls as you study and on the day of the exam. In addition, we will provide some strategies to strengthen your responses and help you assure that your knowledge is best demonstrated. Part 1. Common mistakes. Regardless of your native language, certain mistakes are common among all candidates. In Part 3 of the test, where your task is to keep a flowing discussion of more complex topics with the examiner, candidates can be nervous or unclear on the meaning of the questions posed by the examiner, or they could find it difficult to maintain a discussion with a stranger. The first common mistake related to this part is long periods of silence. In the video about common mistakes from part 2 of the speaking test, we discussed that using fillers like, that's a good question, and, ooh, let me think, is a good idea, only when the situation warrants them. For example, if a question really is a good question or really requires that you think about it. Long periods of silence can indicate that you don't understand the question, even if you did, but you are just trying to formulate a good response. However, if you really did misunderstand the question of the examiner in part 3, it will be obvious and be difficult to continue your discussion naturally. If this is the case, there are ways to indicate that you need a bit of help from the examiner, which could also be used in conversations between friends in English. We will discuss these other options later on in this video. A second and commonly made mistake on part 3 is to defer the question back to the examiner. It is understandable that you take a few moments to gather your thoughts after the questions on the topic are asked. Now, that's normal in any natural conversation. However, asking the examiner, I don't know, what do you think, is never appropriate and is a dead giveaway that you cannot produce a response quickly enough. The purpose of part 3 is to test your ability to do just that, to respond to the questions about a common topic in a slightly more formal way with almost no preparation, like you can do easily in discussions with peers or professors in your native language. You are the one answering the questions, not the examiner, so don't try to use this trick. As usual, it will only indicate that you aren't able to answer quickly enough. Another common error that some candidates make in part 3 of the speaking test is trying to cover their accent. On the IELTS exam, which of course is an exam taken only by people who don't speak English as their first language, the examiners expect to hear your accent, and having one does not affect your score. However, there is a difference between having an accent and pronouncing some words incorrectly. The examiner doesn't expect you to sound like a native speaker, but points will be deducted if you use words that aren't pronounced as they should be. A very important point to note in part 3 of the speaking test is that at this point, you will have been speaking for nearly 10 minutes. That may not seem like a lot, but when most of the pressure to speak is on you alone and not on the examiner, you may feel a bit tired by the end. Ironically, the end of the speaking test is the part that requires the most thought. Some candidates, especially the ones with a more basic to intermediate level of English, may start out strong on the speaking test, but tend to slow down and feel less confident towards the end as they get tired. Part 2. Strategies. In order to avoid some of the common mistakes we've listed, we're going to provide some strategies that can help to combat the tendency to commit these errors. Strategy 1. Study and practice using new fillers. This way, you can use them when they are necessary and not use them when they're not. Especially in part 3 of the speaking part, where you will be in a conversation-style discussion. You may need a filler to lead into your opinion on a certain topic, which is natural. Here is a list of fillers that you can use if you need to. But above all, remember that these are only to be used sparingly, when absolutely necessary and appropriate. Optional fillers. Do you know what I mean? Well, you see, that's an interesting question. That's a difficult question. Actually, anyway. Strategy 2. Ask your examiner for help. It is more detrimental to misunderstand a question entirely in the part 3 discussion and begin talking about an unrelated topic than to ask your examiner to repeat the question or to ask it in another way. It happens in normal conversations in English that you can mishear a person or not understand what they meant by a certain question or statement. So you casually ask them to repeat what they said. As we explained in the section on common mistakes, you should never directly say, "I don't understand." That wouldn't be appropriate to say in a regular conversation in English, and it isn't appropriate on the IELTS exam either. However, there are many more natural ways to request a little help with understanding, if you need to. As we said, this is a much better alternative to answering a question you didn't understand in a way that doesn't make sense. Optional ways to ask for help with a question. So, do you mean... Would you mind repeating that? I didn't catch that. What did you mean by... Strategy 3. Be yourself. The examiners on the speaking test are experienced and have seen countless candidates perform. It is important to realize that they will know if you are using a fake accent, employing vocabulary you don't understand, or simply reciting something that you have memorized previously. For that reason, your best route is to simply be you. Spend your time practicing pronunciation of certain difficult words, not trying to hide your accent. On the day of the exam, especially on part 3, answer the questions honestly and don't try to invent answers that seem more interesting. If you are asked about your opinion on a topic in part 3, well, give it. You're not graded on the content of your response, but rather how well you express yourself in English. If you were asked about an improvement that could be made in education in your country, and you honestly believe that the food served at schools should be a better quality, say that. Don't attempt to provide a more complex response. Just use your own natural ideas to create a well-expressed and grammatically correct answer. Strategy 4. Maintain communication throughout the whole test. Now that you are aware of the progression of the speaking test, you know that part 1 is the most simple, with part 2 being a bit more difficult with the note-taking task and the monologue, and finally part 3, which is a bit more natural, but is the longest and requires the most thinking on your part. Because the test goes from simplest to hardest, remember this and prepare for it well. The more you can practice with a partner for long periods of time, for 10 or more minutes at a time, and record your conversations, the better you will feel. Try to build up endurance as you go so that you can continue to demonstrate the greatest of your skills over time. This can't be done without practice. If you become nervous or you feel unprepared at the exam, just remember that part 3 is a task that you have performed countless times in your everyday life in your native language. When all else fails, remember to rely on your knowledge of what's appropriate and what isn't in a natural discussion of a topic. If you remember that you actually have quite a bit of experience with this, you will feel more relaxed as you practice before the day of the exam. See you next time.
Thanks again for watching. If you like this video, please subscribe. We have over 75 video lessons that were designed by an IELTS examiner who knows how to help you get the score you deserve. If you'd like to access more Father IELTS videos, more sample tasks, worksheets, and even use some of our practice exams, well, check out our full courses over on Udemy by clicking on the links in the description below. Those links will give you 85% off the full course price and give you full access to all of the materials we offer. I wish you the best of luck on your IELTS exam. See you next time.